Welcome back. By this point, I hope that you're getting more comfortable with your group and with the content of the book. That's good, because we're getting ready to tackle some tough stuff. And what a grand adventure this is to explore the deeper things of God and humanity together. This week's content is packed full of challenging ideas. Much of it's self-explanatory, but there's one particular chapter that I'd like to highlight for you. That's chapter 16, Beyond the Conscience. Beyond the Conscience. The topic of the human conscience can be a confusing one, and some of the ideas that I presented in the book will be radically new for some people, kind of like that new traffic pattern. This is also a discussion that can easily get bogged down. So the better of a handle that you have on the concepts involved, the better equipped you'll be to facilitate the discussion. Let's begin with the origin of the conscience. When I consider evolutionary theory, there are some aspects I look at and think, I could see how that might have happened. But when it comes to the supposed evolution of the conscience, I see our scientific efforts falling way short, way short. And as much as humanity likes to think that we have a firm grasp on such issues, the truth is that we are deep on speculation and low on actual science when it comes to the existence of the human conscience. First of all, how does a mindless life form develop from inorganic matter? In other words, how does life come out of non-life? Then, how does it develop not only the ability to be self-aware, but also an internal sense of morality, a sense of right and wrong, or a sense of good and evil? And if, by some extreme chance, the conscience could happen to evolve apart from divine influence, how many gazillion years would it take for something so incredibly complex to develop through an unguided random process? On the contrary, the Genesis account in the Bible provides a truly powerful explanation for understanding why we are wired the way that we are wired. And unlike naturalists, who are shackled with the overwhelming burden to provide a viable explanation for how things happened, Christians are free to focus on the why. We don't need the how because we know that we have the how in the existence of God and His creation of the universe. Genesis gives us the how. At least enough of the how. The conscience is related to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and so the first why question to arise will likely be, why did God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden to begin with? In other words, why does evil exist? That's the age-old question that we're really asking here. This question can make for a fascinating and lively discussion in itself, but it can also consume a lot of time, and thus it doesn't fit well with this study. The short and easy answer is that because God created humankind in His image, He also gave us the freedom and capacity to love, which also requires the freedom of choice. There's actually an even more inspiring and profound explanation to the forbidden tree that I've explored in my book, Drinking Truth, Embracing the Covenant Mindset of the Bible. So if you want to go deeper with this topic, I'd encourage you to look in that direction. But for now, that's all we're going to say about the existence of evil, and we're going to come back to our original issue of the conscience. And in that, we must consider the nature of the tree. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and not just the tree of the knowledge of evil. Let me say that again. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and not just the tree of the knowledge of evil. In other words, good can be just as deadly as evil and perhaps more deceptive. Now, before Adam and Eve ate from the tree, all that they knew was God or not God, God or not God, obey God, disobey God. Their only awareness was of God's love and the warning that He had given them. But when they ate from that tree, their eyes were opened. In other words, they suddenly became aware of standards of good and evil. In a very real sense, the mindset of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil then became embedded in the human psyche. And because it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there are good and bad dynamics involved with the tree, just like there are with the conscience. But it becomes truly deadly when combined with the quest to be like God apart from God. This is what changes everything. In other words, when you combine standards of good and evil with our natural quest towards self-glorification, towards lifting ourselves up to the throne of God, pride is empowered to rear its ugly head. The tendency to live by standards of good and evil is now innate to all humanity, and this became especially evident as civilizations began to develop. Written laws that codified those standards became necessary to keep people civilized, really, to put it bluntly, to keep them from killing each other. And so humanity began to develop its own legal codes, such as the Code of Hammurabi and several others. God then got into the action by giving the Mosaic Law, which had the Ten Commandments as its cornerstone. What was going on here? Through the Mosaic Law, the Lord was providing humanity an opportunity to relate to Him through the law-based paradigm that Adam and Eve had chosen when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's a connection here. And because of this covenant of law, we see so much judgment throughout the Old Testament. It is all tied to standards and to law and to living up to those standards. Now again, there is zero difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. The difference is because of the covenant of law in contrast to the covenant of grace. So where does this leave us as Christians? First, we want to remember that living by the standards of law was humanity's choice and not God's. It is the new covenant of grace that more fully reflects His heart. Second, we must recognize that the conscience is not the voice of God. I repeat, the conscience is not the voice of God. He does not speak to us that way. Third, we realize that the conscience has no power to make us live well. It only reminds us of the standards, and after a moral action, it will either congratulate us, pat us on the back, or it will accuse us and condemn us. Fourth, we want to celebrate the power of Christ's blood to fully cleanse any guilty conscience. This is a huge deal. And fifth, we seek to develop a new approach to living, one that does not encourage lawlessness. This new approach involves two key dynamics. The law of love, which God writes on our hearts, becomes the law that governs our actions. And just as importantly, we submit ourselves to the guidance, correction, and discipline of the Holy Spirit. He will always guide us into love. When about to pursue an action that is contrary to the Lord's ways, a seasoned Christian will sometimes speak of having a lack of peace, or what they would call a check in his or her spirit. Another common phrase speaks of being convicted by the Holy Spirit. We're not talking about being judged guilty and thrown into prison, but rather having a persistent inner sense that we're about to make a bad choice. Ignoring the conviction of the Holy Spirit will most certainly lead us on a path to regret. I know, I've been there. If you get a chance sometime, ask me about the Cruise of Lights. Anyway, I hope that this overview of the conscience was helpful to you. I'm not suggesting that you teach all this material to the people in your group. I just want to make sure that you understand the concepts involved so that you will be better equipped to navigate some of the questions that might arise during your discussion. Living beyond the conscience in a biblical context means living in freedom but without the chaos that self-will brings. As challenging as these concepts can be to process, the end result is more than worth the effort.